We're going to start today speaking about the biological model. Ay, ¿por qué no le... Okay. This is the biological model of health or the biological approach to health. Es diferente cuando digo model of health y approach es to health. Enfoque no sé cuál sea la diferencia, de cambiarle ahí la preposition, pero bueno. Okay, so we said that last class we were speaking about the biomedical model of health. The biomedical model was more a mechanic model where they compare the body with a machine. In that way of looking at the body, we decided that the scientists at that times believed that if there were something wrong in the body, they needed to fix that with the use of some kind of medicine. And they believed in symptoms. If the patient didn't present symptoms, that means that the patient is not sick, that he was just imagining some kind of sickness in their lives, right? So the biological model of health is similar, or it's a part of the biomedical model of health. The biological model focuses on that if something is wrong with your health, it's because a part of your organism is not working okay. But all the things, all the sicknesses or the illnesses or the diseases not necessarily have symptoms, physical symptoms or visible symptoms that sometimes doctors are not allowed to see. That's why this model is so close to psychology. The biological model is used a lot in psychology because of the thing they work with, the brain structure, the nervous system, and things like that. First, we're going to watch a video, and then I'm going to explain a little bit more about the biological approach.
The biological approach believes that all behavior is caused by physical processes such as genetics, brain structure or brain chemistry, and hormones. This can be shown by your heart pounding or having sweaty palms. Natural selection might explain why we seem to fear certain potentially dangerous animals like poisonous snakes or spiders, or why fears of heights or closed-in spaces are relatively common. It's probably true that our ancestors had the sense to stay away from cliff edges and hissing serpents, and were more likely to live another day, so they could pass along their genes. So this might explain why those fears can persist, and even people who live in places without poisonous snakes would still face snakes anyway. Research has shown that, for example, that identical twins are more likely to develop phobias even if they're raised apart. Some researchers have detected 17 different genes that seem to be expressed with various anxiety disorders, so it may be that some people are just naturally more anxious than others through genetics. There are 3 exceptions to the biological approach. Assumption 1. Behavior can be explained in terms of different areas of the brain. Many different areas of the brain have been identified which are specialized for certain functions. The most important is the frontal lobe, which is responsible for fine motor movement and thinking. Underneath the lobe, there are various structures, such as the hypothalamus, which integrates the ANS, which is important for stress and emotion. Assumption 2. Behavior can be explained in terms of neurotransmitters. Neurons are electrical cells that form the basis of the nervous system. The flexibility of the nervous system is enhanced by having many branches at the end of each neuron, which are called dendrites, so that each neuron connects with many others. One neuron communicates with another neuron at the synapse, when the message is relayed by chemical messages, neurotransmitters. Some common neurotransmitters are dopamine, which is associated with awards and also schizophrenia, serotonin, adrenaline, and GABA. Assumption 3. Behavior can be explained in terms of hormones. Hormones are biochemical substances that are produced in one part of the body, like the adrenal glands, and circulate in the blood, having an effect on the target organs. They are produced in large quantities, but disappear very quickly. Their effects are slow in comparison with the nervous system, but very powerful. Examples of hormones include testosterone and estrogen. Some hormones, such as adrenaline, are also neurotransmitters. Early treatments for mental disorders include psychosurgery. Moniz developed a surgical procedure called a prefrontal lobotomy in the 1930s. This involved drilling a hole on each side of the skull and inserting an instrument that resembled an ice pick to destroy the nerve fibers underneath. Moniz later refined his technique by designing an instrument with a retractable wire loop that could cut into the white matter of the brain and sever nerve fibers. It was hoped that cutting into the nerve pathways that carry thoughts from one part of the brain to the other would relieve patients of their distressing thoughts and behaviors. This was used for treatments for mental illnesses like depression or schizophrenia. Strengths of the biological approach include being very scientific because the experiments used are measurable, objective, and can be repeated to test reliability. Also, the researcher has more control over the variables. Being deterministic is that if we know what predetermines our behavior, we are more likely to be able to treat people with abnormal behavior. For instance, the neurotransmitter dopamine has been linked with the mental disorder of schizophrenia. The biological approach has led to many successful applications. For example, the general adaptation syndrome model led to a large amount of other research that has demonstrated that people recover less quickly from wounds if they are stressed. Such understanding is applied in a hospital setting to reduce anxiety and stress in patients so that they can recover more quickly. Weaknesses of biological approach include the theories being too simplistic because it develops theories about disorders and generalizes them to apply to everyone. It does not take into account the view that humans are unique. An example of this is that the general adaptation syndrome assumes that everyone responds in the same way to stress, but does not take into account that some people have more support than others. Reductionism is a part of understanding how a system works, but the problem is that in the process, we may lose a real understanding of the thing we are investigating. For example, the biological approach suggests that an illness such as schizophrenia is basically a complex physical, chemical system that has gone wrong. Mental illness has multiple causes, yet the biological approach focuses on just biology, the nature side, tending to ignore life experiences and psychological factors, the nurture, such as how people think and feel. For example, one theory is that schizophrenia is genetic. However, twin studies show that it is not completely genetic and the environment has a part to play.
Okay, so this was a little introduction to the biological approach to health. So, as you saw in the video, the biological model of health is based a lot in genetics, okay? These things that we inherit from our family, from our parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents, and all that people, a lot of sicknesses. That's why when you go to the doctor, sometimes the doctor asks you the first time you go to that place, if you have kind of family with chronic diseases, or if someone got cancer in your family, if someone, I don't know, have like obesity, hypertension, and things like that, because it's the way they structure the disease that you present or the illness that you present. Remember that disease is the physical lack of health, and the illness is what we feel about our lack of health, okay? So the biological model, it started like 60 years ago or more. In 1948, the World Health Organization proposed that health is a complete state of physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease. Decíamos en español también que es el bienestar integral de la persona, ¿no? Del individuo, no nada más el bienestar físico, sino también abarca lo mental y lo social, el ambiente, ¿no? Es completo. So, with this definition, the WHO sought to replace the biological model of health and disease with the biopsychosocial model. That's where it all started to change. As you saw in the video, they said that the biological model was based on the things that has to do with physiology and not with the symptoms or the things a patient feel in that moment. Right or wrong? Okay, so the biological model of health, as I told you, started at the beginning of the 19th century. This means the 1800 years, okay? There was a dichotomy between health and disease that was promoted by the biological model. And it started with the doctrine of the specific etiology of Louis Pasteur and Robert Koch, who demonstrated that biomedical or physiological lesions could cause a disease. So they demonstrate that when you have I don't know, if you have a sore finger. I have a sore finger because I fell down and there is bleeding in my finger, and then that bleeding was infected with a bacteria, and that it's in my organism, and now I have some kind of disease caused by that bacteria. So that was what people in the 19th century, or the beginnings of the 19th century, thought about a disease. Their work says that led to the conclusion that an unaffected individual, this means without a physical or a visible lesion, would have no adverse symptoms and be healthy, whereas an affected individual will necessarily develop symptoms and be diseased. So what was the difference here? That they believed the same as biomedical model of health. They said that if you have no symptoms, if you have no physical or visible lesions, you are healthy. You don't have to think that you're sick. It's not okay. You're like possessed by a demon or a thing like that. But it doesn't mean that you are sick because you are not visibly sick. Okay? The biological approach also says that the mere presence of a specific biological factor is not always sufficient to cause disease, which suggests that the biological model is inadequate in this scope. Like when we speak about, I'm going to put this example because I saw it today at Facebook. There was like this kind of Miss Universe, something like that, and she throw herself from a 9th floor in the US because she has depression, chronic depression or something like that. And all the pictures that she uploaded on her social media, she was like really happy and she looked really healthy, and people cannot understand what happened to her. That's what happened. That kind of things are the ones that the biological approach are not able to detect on the patient, ¿sí? Cuando el enfoque biológico, uno de sus defectos o de sus deficiencias es eso, que no es capaz de detectar trastornos o enfermedades a nivel mental, emocional del individuo. Obviamente, hay personas que al momento de, ay, tengo depresión, yo tengo una conocida que cada vez que tiene depresión lo grita al cielo. Entonces yo digo que ella no tiene depresión. Yo en lo personal, desde mi punto y perspectiva de vista psicológica, siento que a ella únicamente le gusta llamar la atención. Entonces escribe unos choros mareadores ahí en Facebook de que yo tengo depresión y choqué mi carro y me aventé como coche a la calle y así, ¿no? Entonces la mayoría de la gente que tiene un problema de depresión muy grande no lo presenta o no lo demuestra. Es como la gente que se va a suicidar, no lo publica, no lo dice, no amenaza con que me voy a matar y se pone el cuchillo aquí. Y he tenido pacientes así y yo, ¿y cómo le vas a hacer? ¿Y dónde te lo vas a encajar? Porque si no te lo encajas bien no te vas a matar, pues. ¿Vas a quedar vivo? ¡Qué flojera! Ahí va a tener uno que andar aguantando contigo de paciente ahí medio muerto, pues no, medio zombie. Entonces, la gente que de verdad lo va a hacer, no lo publica, pues, no lo anda divulgando, ¿sí? Sí, puede que dejen una carta póstuma, claro, pues, y a lo mejor hay señales que nosotros externamente podemos ver, pero no es algo que físicamente lo puedes detectar tan fácilmente, que es lo que les digo que debe de haber pasado con esta Miss Universo modelo, no sé qué sería, que se aventó del 9º piso y se tiró la mujer, que es que porque tenía depresión, y no parecía que tenía todo menos eso en la vida, ¿verdad? Entonces, Esos son los tipos de síntomas que el modelo biológico no puede detectar porque se enfoca únicamente en la cuestión física o en la falta de salud física del individuo. Okay, the biomedical model of health and illness is like a framework for conceptualizing illnesses in which cause diagnosis, treatments, and prognosis, and that they are viewed like a basis of biological and physical factors and it doesn't pay a lot of attention to the psychological, spiritual, social, and environmental attributes of diseases. That's why sometimes there is a lack of information and some patients are not treated in a good way by doctors that are really close to the biological approach. The biological approach believes that behavior is like a consequence of our genetics and physiology. It's the only approach in psychology that really examines thoughts, feelings, and behaviors from a biological and physical point of view. That's why this approach is really important to psychology and mental health, okay? Because it goes and search for the real reason of why a person has depression, why a person has like se me fue la enfermedad esta de todos los niños de ahora de moda, el autismo no, la hiperactividad. Digo, va por modas, ¿no? Va por términos. Pero, por ejemplo, hay niños inquietos, hay niños más inquietos, hay 20,000 factores del ambiente que hacen que un niño sea hiperactivo hoy en día, que no tienen nada que ver con una cuestión neurológica. Pero ¿qué pasa? El niño es hiperactivo, ¿no? La maestra lo manda la cartita. El niño es hiperactivo. El niño es hiperactivo y luego o lo medican o lo mandan de volada a una terapia muy hardcore que el niño realmente no necesita. Denme 3 segundos para conectar mi computadora porque morirá en el intento. Listo. Okay. Entonces, ¿qué es lo que pasa? Que el enfoque biológico es el único que entonces dice, bueno, sí hay enfermedades mentales que no presentan síntomas visibles, entonces tenemos que buscar la causa neurológica dentro del cerebro de qué es lo que está mal. Por eso este enfoque es muy pegado a la cuestión psicológica. Therefore, all that is psychological is first physiological. All thoughts, feelings, and behavior have a biological cause. A biological perspective is relevant to the study of psychology in 3 ways. This doesn't mean that all the treatments or all the diseases that has to do with psychology and mental health are biological. Remember that this is different, but this is the only approach of health that can focus on discovering what is wrong in our brains, okay? So we have 3 different ways that it can be applied to psychology, and the first one is a comparative method where different species of animals can be studied and compared. This can help in the search to understand human behavior, and it is also used in biomedical research. Remember that sometimes some doctors and scientists first experience and do experiments with rats and pigs and monkeys and even cows to prove some kind of drugs that they are going to use with people later. The physiology, because it studies how the nervous system and hormones work, how the brain functions, how changes in structure and the function can affect behavior. For example, we could ask how prescribed drugs to treat depression affect behavior through their interaction with the nervous system. And the last one is investigation of inheritance. What an animal inherits from its parents, mechanisms of inheritance, all the genetics. For example, we might want to know whether the high intelligence is inherited from one generation to the next. Or maybe some parents said, I have a kid that is really smart and the other, well, it's really dumb, okay? And why? Why? Because in my house, everyone is really smart, even if that's not true, okay? So here we have a small timeline of the biological approach. First, we have the voyage of the Beagle. That was one of the first studies of Darwin. Remember that Charles Darwin used to have these ideas that we come from the monkeys and the animals, and that animals have like this kind of evolution until they become humans. So he started to make his theory of the natural selection through observing animals while he traveled around the world. Then in 1848, Harlow says that Phineas Gage brain injury case study provides neuroscience with significant information regarding the working of the brain. So he was one of the first scientists on studying the brain. How does it work? How is it connected to the nervous system? And how some kind of the lack of some hormones or neurotransmitters can end up like in different kind of schizophrenia, psychosis, and other sicknesses. Darwin in 1859, he remembered that he continued studying the evolution of the animals, so he published the origin of the species by means of natural selection. He sold a lot of copies the first day of his book, and his theory was approved by many people. Not the religious one, because until these days they said that this cannot be true. And sometimes I think maybe if his theory were really, really true, well, maybe we could see like monkeys changing a little bit today. Then in 1957, Jane Goodall began the study of primates in Africa, discovering that chimps have behaviors really similar to all the human cultures of the planet. And you know, sometimes we know some humans that act like chimps or monkeys, and sometimes monkeys behave better than some people that we know, right? But she was the first woman that studied that. That's why the girl that is in the movie Tarzan, it's called Jane, because of this young scientist lady in 1957. In 1975, Edward Wilson published the book Sociobiology, which brought together evolutionary perspective to the psychology. The sociobiology says that we have social factors that can affect our biological system in human health. And the last one was in 1992, the birth of the evolutionary psychology begins with the publication of an essay called The Psychological Foundations of Culture, where it says that the culture where you live can change your ways of living or your lifestyle. Now, the biological approach uses very scientific methods to work, like scans, biochemistry, x-rays, tomographies, and animals are often used in this approach to make like similar kind of studies. Ellos buscan animales que tengan cierto parecido, que sus órganos sean parecidos a los de los seres humanos para poder hacer sus investigaciones. Se apegan un chorro al método científico, entonces son estudios muy exactos. The biological approach believes that most behavior is inherited and has an adaptive function. For example, in the weeks immediately after the birth of a child, the levels of testosterone in fathers drop by more than 30%, and this has an evolutionary function, okay? Entonces dice aquí que también que mucho del comportamiento es heredado de padres a hijos de manera genética, ¿no? Aquí nos habla que la genética hace que nosotros adquiramos cierto tipo de enfermedades y también cierto tipo de pensamientos. Sí, está comprobado que los pensamientos también se heredan. Ahora, the biological approach to psychology is one way to conceptualize and explain the human experience. The biological approach seeks to explain mental processes and behavior by focusing on the function of the nervous system at the cellular and structural level. Entonces, aquí esto quiere decir que el modelo biológico de la salud, ya en la cuestión donde entra a la salud mental, que es donde les digo que se enfoca más, nos habla de que hace un estudio de todo lo que es el sistema nervioso y el cerebro y cómo funciona. Entonces aquí les puse un ejemplo que dice, let's take that out, the hippocampus. The hippocampus and the hypothalamus are the ones in our brain that make us remember. So if I can't remember when happened, but eso significa que el hipocampo y el hipotálamo son los que guardan los recuerdos en nuestra mente. Entonces, se hizo un experimento que a una persona le quitaron esta parte del cerebro y esta persona dejó de tener recuerdos así como tristes de su vida, o sea, tristes y felices. Todo se le olvidó, como que no. Ya ven que de repente hay como, hay un aroma y, ay, con ese aroma me acuerdo algo. Ah, cuando te quitan eso, se acaban esos recuerdos. Es mágico. Entonces, ya lo experimentaron una persona y funcionó. The biological approach is very scientific because the experiments used are measurable, objective, and can be repeated to test reliability. It is deterministic because it increases the likelihood of being able to treat people with abnormal behavior and provides explanations about the causes of the behavior. Entonces, como se apega al método científico, decimos aquí que este enfoque biológico nos sirve mucho para ese tipo de investigaciones, ¿sí? Para las investigaciones que tienen que ver con las cuestiones y los movimientos cerebrales y que tienen que ver con la explicación de dónde vienen, de por qué actúan y por qué se comportan las personas de cierta manera cuando tienen algún tipo de desconexión ahí en su cerebro, ¿no? Cuando hay un cortocircuito ahí en los cables de las neuronas. The start of modern biological psychology in the late 19th century was inspired by the works of Ernest Weber and Gustav Fechner, who applied methods of physiology to psychology, like Schultz and Schultz in 1992. Estos dos fueron los encargados de empezar a relacionar lo físico con lo psicológico emocional. Los que dijeron, cuando estos neurotransmisores no son segregados correctamente en la sinapsis de las neuronas, entonces, ¡pum!, es cuando truena y por eso pasa esa cuestión, ¿no? Que la gente de repente se le bota el chango. And the last thing is the biological approach in healthcare by helping the service user learn new techniques and coping strategies like self-soothing and self-regulation. This means that the service user can then control their behavior without the need for medication, and they will learn how to act in different situations. Now, when we speak about healthcare and prevention, this means the way we can help people to don't have a disease, like a mental disease or a mental disorder, okay? And they teach people how to control their behavior and the way they react to some things. So, this was the biological approach. Here are some references that I'm going to give to you so you can use this to your paper. Entonces, dijimos que hay dos trabajos escritos. El primero es ese, del enfoque biológico de la salud. El segundo es un resumen del documento que ahorita les voy a subir del modelo ecológico, que es el que vamos a ver el día de mañana martes. Y vayan armando sus equipos para lo del cartel. Esa imagen del cartel hay que subirla a la plataforma antes del día miércoles, porque yo voy a hacer como una presentación de sus carteles para que ustedes los comenten o les compartan a sus compañeros en la clase. Los que se conectan a las 2 también van a tener que presentar a esta hora, así que ya les dije que ese miércoles sí se tienen que presentar en su clase normal, porque únicamente va a ser presentación de carteles el próximo miércoles. De esta semana no, el próximo, que es 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 9. El 9 de febrero. ¿Okay? Ahorita les voy a poner todas las actividades, se las voy a subir con todos los requisitos de cada una de las actividades. Si tienen alguna duda, pues ya saben, me pueden mandar un mensajito, me pueden preguntar. ¿Qué más? Paloma, apellido. Paloma, ¿cómo te apellidas?
Palomares.
Palomares.
Sí.
Palomares, Alondra.
Sí.
Ah, es que me parece Paloma aquí, yo dije Paloma. Ok, ¿alguien más? Que haya llegado después.
Soto Valdés.
Soto Valdés. Ok. ¿Nadie más?
En el equipo del cartel